I am God, and I saw him. I saw him the moment his knees buckled under the weight of his own pride, when the feast of the world glittered brighter than my light in his eyes. I watched him lift the cup of laughter at midnight parties, the smile painted across his face while his soul quietly cried. I saw him fall again and again into the shadows that promised fullness but delivered emptiness. Yet even then my heart did not turn away, for before he wandered I had already called him. Before he was broken I had already chosen him, and before he thought himself lost I knew how I would bring him back. That is where the story begins, not in the darkness of sin, but in the innocence of the child I once delighted in. I remember him as a boy. His laughter rang out in the backyard like bells in the morning air. The grass was long brushing against his knees as he chased a ball with his friends, his cheeks flushed with the kind of joy only children know. And even then, though his lips did not know my name fully, I was near. Every breath of wind that cooled his skin, every bird that darted across the sky whispered, "You are mine." He would sit on the front porch with his grandmother, listening as her voice rose in old hymns. Her hands worked the dough, her apron smudged with flour, but her heart lifted with song. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. He didn't yet understand the weight of those words, but he felt something warmth, peace, the faint brush of my spirit. At night when he climbed beneath worn blankets, his father sometimes knelt beside the bed. With weary hands from long work days, the father would place one palm on his son's shoulder and whisper, "Lord, guide my boy. Keep him safe." He didn't know that those whispered prayers were not vanishing into the dark, but rising before me like incense. I caught each one. I remembered. In church, the boy sat restless on the wooden pews. Sunlight poured through stained glass, scattering crimson and gold across his small shoulders. He'd watch dust dance in the beams of light, more interested in their shimmer than in the pastor's long sermon. But then during the hymn, something stirred in him. He felt his throat tighten, though he didn't know why. He'd hear voices all around him singing, "Holy, holy, holy," and his heart would tremble. That was me. That was my spirit tugging softly, marking him as mine. One summer at a church camp in the mountains, he knelt on a rough wooden floor with other children. His knees pressed against splinters, but he didn't care. He bowed his head, and with a trembling voice he whispered, "Jesus, I want you." His mother guided him, tears wetting her cheeks. And in that little cabin bathroom, the only private space they could find, he prayed. That prayer was small, but in heaven it thundered. I leaned close. I sealed him. As he grew, I gave him gifts. A tenderness of heart, a quick smile, a way of gathering friends. He joined the children's choir, standing nervously with others, clutching his sheet of music. His voice cracked, but when he sang, I heard it as worship. He didn't know that angels joined in filling the air with harmonies only I could hear. When he was 12, he sat at a campfire, flames licking upward, sparks vanishing into the starry night. The counselor spoke about my call, about how some are set apart for ministry. The boy felt it. Deep inside as a fire popped and the night pressed in, he whispered to me, "I want to serve you." That night I marked him. He belonged to me. But being marked does not mean being immune to temptation. Seeds of pride, small and almost invisible, began to sprout. Compliments on his charm, applause for his skill on the field, attention from peers, it all watered that pride. And though I spoke through scripture, through gentle whispers, through mentors who warned him, his ears began to close. Even still I watched him. I rejoiced when he knelt to pray, when he sang with genuine tears, when he comforted a friend in my name. These were glimpses of who he was meant to be: a shepherd, a leader, a light. But I also foresaw the drift. I knew the years ahead, the way the world would spread its banquet before him. Music that numbed friends, that enticed pleasures, that pulled. I saw the nights he would slip from his parents' home rebellion, pounding in his chest like a drum. I saw the drinks lifted high, the laughter too loud, the compromises too small to notice at first. And yet, though I knew he would run, I never turned away. My love was not contingent on his faithfulness. My covenant was not fragile. I held him even when he tried to pull from my grasp. Some say, if God knew why, didn't he stop it? Hear this, I do not chain my children. Love is not love if it is forced. I let him choose, let him taste, let him wander, because in the wandering his hunger would grow. I knew that when his feast turned bitter, he would remember the sweetness of my table. And so I waited. I watched his innocence ripen into adolescence and then tremble at the edge of adulthood. I smiled when he lifted his hands in worship. I grieved when he began to lower them. But nothing surprised me. I am the beginning and the end. I saw the entire arc of his story, from boyhood laughter to the shadowed years of rebellion and then to the glorious return. My delight was not erased by his failures. My plan was not canceled by his sin. He did not yet know it, but every step he took, both toward me and away from me, was within my sight. And in time, even his wandering would become the path that led him back to my light. He grew taller, shoulders filling the Letterman jacket steps, quick with the certainty of someone who kept winning. Stadium lights burned white. Moths spun in their heat. He laced his cleats and the coach barked, "You're the spark tonight." Brass blared. The fence rattled with cheers. I watched a seed of pride push through the soil. A compliment here, a lingering cheer there, and the boy, nearly a man, began to taste the sugar of applause. It does not satisfy. He could not know that yet. After games, the parking lot turned festival tailgates down, music thumping, soda cans hissing open, and not always soda. A girl with a ponytail leaned into him and whispered, "You were incredible." He looked away, pretending humility, but inside he stood taller. Friends clapped his back. "Danny, you killed it." His grin said, "More. Say more." I spoke quiet enough to require choosing me over the noise. "Remember who gave you breath." He felt it like a feather against conscience. Then the bass dropped harder and pride drowned the whisper. On Sundays he still came. He knew when to stand, when to sit, when to nod at the right phrases. The pastor met him at the door, a hand on his shoulder. "How are you really?" He shifted. "Good, Pastor." "Busy." The pastor held his gaze a heartbeat longer. "Keep your heart soft." The boy promised, then counted the seconds until he could leave. His mother noticed new distances, longer showers, locked screens, laughter that sounded a touch forced. One evening, she knocked. "You all right?" He opened the door partway. Cologne hung in the air. "Yeah, Mom. Don't wait up." She searched his eyes, the windows that once shone after youth group. "Text me when you're headed home." When the front door clicked, she breathed into the sink. "Lord, keep him close." I received her prayer. I sealed it with others. They were not lost. Temptation arrived smiling. The first party felt harmless, laughter, photos, a red cup he swore he'd only hold for appearance. One sip, then another. Warmth curled through his chest, fogging the edges of honesty. He liked how it slowed his worry, made him brave enough to say things he'd never say sober. After midnight, he sat on the porch steps with the same girl. Her perfume was floral, her voice a sling of compliments. "You don't realize how special you are." He leaned closer, dizzy with being adored. Far off, a train horn mourned. I called him like wind across fields, gentle, insistent. "Come home." He rubbed his temples. "Headache," he said, and kissed her anyway. Pride seldom roars at first. It hums with the chorus everyone else is singing. Teachers praised his essays. Coaches highlighted his instincts. Employers liked his hustle. He earned a small paycheck, bought a second-hand car, and wiped it every Saturday until it gleamed. The neighbor waved, "Looking sharp, son." He laughed, trying to keep up, while something inside replied, "Not keeping up, leading." I set scripture like breadcrumbs, a verse on the calendar by the fridge, a sermon about the prodigal that echoed louder than the rest, a hymn on the radio slipping between commercials, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. He hummed along without thinking, then retuned the dial when the chorus cut too close. At school, a friend from church invited him to small group. Thursday, you and the boy lifted his bag and shrugged. "I'll try." Thursday became overtime at his job, then a date, then nothing. Later, he texted, "Sorry, bro, next week." The friend replied with a thumbs up, the kind that hides its ache. He still had bright moments when his heart recognized me. Driving home late, fog lifting from the river, he saw the moon pearl white above the trees, and his chest swelled with the old awareness, someone is near. He whispered thanks into the empty car. That whisper was a door. He almost stepped through. Then the phone buzzed, he swiped. The moment passed. His father tried simple wisdom. Saturday, they changed the oil in the garage. The air smelled of rubber and coffee. Grease darkened their hands. "Proud of you," the father said, sliding from under the chassis. "Thanks, Dad." A pause. I placed a question on the father's tongue. "You still praying?" Silence stretched. "Yeah, sometimes." The father handed him a rag. "Make time, or you'll forget the sound of your own soul." He laughed it off, but the words clung like oil in his fingerprints. Some mornings were sharper. A youth leader pulled him aside after service. "You're one others follow. That's a gift. If you wander, they'll wander with you." He stared at the floor. "I'm good." The leader nodded, grief threading his tone. "I hope so." The drift gathered speed like a river after rain. Small compromises became stepping stones. He learned the jokes that win a circle. He learned that suggestive glances open doors. He learned to make promises he didn't intend to keep. He learned the discoloration of conscience scratched too many times by the same nail. I did not thunder. I leaned close. In dreams I placed scenes he could not shake, his grandmother singing, his own child voice whispering vows at camp, the pastor's hand heavy on his shoulder. "How are you, really?" He woke with damp eyes and a tight throat. He almost picked up his Bible. He almost apologized to his mother for the sharp words the night before. Almost is the loneliest word in a drifting life. At 19, he landed better pay on a weekend crew. The schedule meant fewer Sundays. He told himself it was temporary. Money thickened his pockets and thinned his excuses. He bought better clothes, better cologne, better lies. The feast grew louder. The mornings grew quieter. He could still pretend a smile wide, lift a hand during the last song, say the right phrases, but the tremble had left his worship. More doors opened. A supervisor liked his initiative. "You've got leadership written on you," the man said. Pleasure braided with destiny in the boy's chest. He confused compliment for calling and began to treat me as a hobby he'd returned to after he finished becoming impressive. Still threads tied him to grace a grandmother's birthday hymn, a verse on a post-it in his mother's hand. "Guard your heart." A stranger at a gas pump who said, "The Lord hasn't forgotten you," then smiled as if discussing the weather. He laughed about it later, but alone he wondered, how did she know? I knew the rooms he favored, now neon lit with clatter and cheer, dim apartments with curtains half closed, back seats where vows were traded for breathless promises that dissolved before morning. I watched the smile he gave his friends and the ache that followed him home. I was not repelled by smoke or boasts. My holiness does not fracture in loud rooms. I stayed near enough to be found far enough to let his hunger ripen. For now the river carried him, banks blurred. But even as he floated, a rope trailed from his boat, unseen, unbreakable, tied to my hand. I knew where the rapids ended. I knew where the rocks would force a choice. And I knew the day my wind would rise, cutting through the barrier, turning his drifting face toward home. He thought he was in control. He thought the steering wheel turned by his own hand, that the late nights in crowded rooms were trophies of freedom. But I, the Lord, watched every step, every choice, every laughter that turned hollow. The drift that began as subtle currents had now become a rushing river. And though he believed himself invincible, I knew the rocks ahead. The first time he walked into a party that pulsed with flashing lights, the music shook the walls like thunder. Bass pounded against his chest, drowning out every other thought. The air smelled of sweat, perfume, alcohol spilled across sticky floors. Friends shouted his name as though he were a hero returning from battle. He lifted his hands like a champion. I whispered, "This is not your home," but he smothered the sound beneath laughter and noise. He discovered how easy it was to wear a mask. To the world, he was the strong one, the charming one, the one with quick jokes and confident shoulders. Inside, though, shame stirred. When the laughter faded and the night grew quiet, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the choices he said he'd never make. Tears stung, though he brushed them away. "Tomorrow I'll stop," he whispered to himself. But tomorrow arrived with the same temptations, the same invitations, the same applause. I saw him lean against the hood of his car one summer evening, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He coughed but laughed it off when his friends jeered. "First time, huh?" He shrugged. Pride urged him to take another drag. Smoke curled around him like chains. He didn't notice how quickly they tightened. He stepped further, crossing lines once unthinkable. Lust grew bold. Conversations turned to secrecy. Promises made in whispers were broken before sunrise. He felt conviction like a knock on a locked door, but each time he silenced it with excuses. "Everyone's doing it. I deserve this. It's just fun." Yet afterwards, shame swept over him like cold rain. He could no longer sing the songs of his childhood. The words caught in his throat, feeling foreign. Hymns once stirred warmth, but now when his grandmother's voice drifted from the kitchen, he shut his bedroom door. He turned the music up louder, the kind that fed his rebellion. The melodies, filled with curses and defiance, became his soundtrack. His mother's eyes dimmed. She saw the shadows in his smile. "Danny," she whispered one evening at dinner, "are you all right?" He stabbed his fork into the potatoes, forcing a grin. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry." She nodded, but after he left the table, she laid her head on her hands and wept. Her tears fell into my hands. Her prayers were not forgotten. Friends multiplied, but so did loneliness. Crowds surrounded him, yet none touched the ache inside. He laughed louder, told wilder stories, sought riskier thrills. Nights blurred into mornings, hangovers dulled with promises to take it easy next time. But pride whispered, "You're young, you're strong, you can handle it." I watched him in a dim apartment, blinds drawn, bottles scattered. A girl leaned against him, eyes glazed. He smiled at her, but when she left, the silence pressed in heavy. He sat on the edge of the couch, head in his hands. For a moment he thought of me. He thought of his childhood prayers, of the night he whispered, "Jesus, I want you." But shame hissed louder. "Not after what you've done. Not after this." He believed the lie. Addictions crept in like thieves. What began as entertainment grew into chains. He scrolled through images he should not see, feeding a hunger that only grew darker. He told himself it was normal, but afterward his soul recoiled. He clenched his fists, whispered, "God, I'm sorry," but by the next night the cycle repeated. The silence between us widened. I watched him drive fast down highways at midnight, windows down, music blaring to numb the ache. He gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, jaw clenched. Friends in the back seat shouted, cups spilling. They called it freedom. I called it bondage. There were moments I sent warnings, near accidents that jolted his heart, news of friends in trouble, a funeral of a peer gone too soon. For a night he lay awake staring into darkness, thinking, that could have been me. But by morning he had buried the thought beneath pride again. The boy who once lifted his hands in worship now clenched them in fists of rebellion. The heart that once trembled in my presence now beat in rhythm with the world's applause. And still I loved him. Still I pursued him. Still I called his name. I saw him smile for the cameras, posing with friends. But I also saw him later in the bathroom, gripping the sink, eyes red, whispering, "What am I doing?" He stared at his reflection, barely recognizing the face. My spirit pressed gently, "Come home." He splashed water on his face, muttering, "I'll figure it out myself." But he could not, and deep down he knew it. The darkness thickened. Nights once filled with shallow excitement became longer, heavier. His body grew weary, his spirit emptier. And yet he still chased the feast. Like a starving man devouring husks, he filled himself with pleasures that only left him hungrier. This was not the boy his family had prayed for, not the child who once sang hymns by the campfire. But I, the Lord, never lost sight of him. My eyes followed him into every room. My heart broke with every compromise. My spirit whispered through every silence. He thought himself lost beyond return. I knew he was one step closer to the moment I would awaken his heart. He thought he was winning. Outwardly, the mask gleamed. A steady job, a decent paycheck, a circle of friends who slapped him on the back and called him the man. To neighbors and co-workers, he looked like a young man carving his path, chasing success with the energy of youth. But I saw behind the smile. I saw the hollow chambers of his heart, the restless nights, the questions he buried so deep that he dared not speak them aloud. The feasts of pride had turned bitter, yet he returned to them, hoping for a sweetness that was no longer there. Parties grew repetitive. Laughter grew thinner. He found himself staring into glasses half full, wondering why joy did not come with the drink. He looked at faces across the table, friends loud and careless, and felt a loneliness deeper than if he had sat alone in the dark. One night, after too many hours and too many sips, he stumbled home. The apartment was silent. He dropped his keys on the counter and sank into the couch. His head swam. The room tilted. In that dizziness, he felt something terrifying, nothing. No conviction, no whisper, no comfort, just emptiness. He thought of me and realized he could no longer hear me. And that silence frightened him more than the chaos of his sin. Relationships began to crumble. A girl he thought would stay vanished overnight, her last words sharp. "You care more about yourself than anyone else." He laughed it off in public, but in private, those words cut deep. His parents called voices worried, but he avoided their questions. "I'm fine," he insisted, though his grades slipped. His job performance wavered. His promises fell short. Friends noticed too. "You all right, man? You seem off." He shrugged, changed the subject, poured another drink. The bravado worked for a while, but not forever. The cracks showed. I let the weight of consequences settle. I did not abandon him, but I allowed him to feel the gravity of his choices. Because love without truth is not love at all, and only by tasting the bitterness of his feast would he hunger for the bread of life again. There were nights when panic pressed upon his chest like an iron hand. He lay awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, heart racing for no reason he could explain. Shadows loomed larger. What if he never found peace? What if this was all there was? He tried to quiet his mind with music, was scrolling with empty distractions, but none satisfied. The ache remained. One evening after a long shift, he sat in his car in the parking lot, hands gripping the wheel. Rain fell in sheets, drumming against the roof, blurring the world outside. He stared through the windshield, tears stinging his eyes, though he would not let them fall. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he whispered. His breath fogged the glass. He thought no one heard, but I did. Every word, every sigh, every unspoken cry, I heard it all. The world rewarded him with temporary highs, but they came at a cost. His body grew weary. His spirit sagged. Once he sprained his shoulder at work, the pain reminding him of his limits. The doctor told him to rest, but he pushed himself harder instead, unwilling to show weakness. Pride chained him to an image he could no longer sustain. Family gatherings grew tense. His mother searched his face, his father's eyes heavy with questions they did not know how to ask. "We're praying for you," they said. He smiled politely, but inside he winced. Those words felt like mirrors held to his soul, reflecting what he wanted to ignore. At church, he sat in the back once or twice, pulled by nostalgia or guilt. The hymns sounded familiar, but they no longer stirred him. The sermon blurred into background noise. Still I called. I whispered through the pastor's words, "Come home." He shifted uncomfortably, glanced at the exit, told himself he had things to do, and he left unchanged. The breaking point came slowly, like a rope fraying strand by strand, until it finally snapped. He thought he could balance everything: pleasure, pride, responsibility, image. But the load grew heavier, and his strength could not carry it. One night, sitting alone in his apartment, he scrolled endlessly on his phone, searching for something, anything that might fill the void. Videos, pictures, empty chatter. Nothing worked. He set the phone aside, buried his face in his hands, and let the tears come. "God, if you're still there." His voice cracked. "If you're still there, help me." That prayer was weak, almost accidental. But in heaven it roared like thunder. For even the faintest cry from a broken heart reaches my throne. The prodigal son, far from home, finally began to realize he was living among pigs feeding on husks. That realization was not despair, it was the first spark of awakening. I knew he was near the end of himself, and that is where I do my best work. The night he reached the end of himself, I was already near. He thought his prayer in the apartment head bowed into trembling hands when unheard. He thought his words evaporated like mist. But I caught them. I caught them the way a father catches the cry of his child in the dark. The very next morning, a small thing happened, a thing he would almost miss. He turned on the car radio, fumbling with the knobs. Static gave way to a hymn he hadn't heard since childhood. "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." His chest tightened. For a moment, his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. He considered turning it off, but he didn't. He let it play, and though he fought it, tears filled his eyes. That was my voice, not thunder, not lightning. Just a song slipping past his defenses like wind through a crack in the door. Later that week, he wandered into a church. Not his old church, but another small, simple, with white walls and wooden pews. He hadn't planned to go. A co-worker had invited him a dozen times, and finally, in a moment of weakness or curiosity, he said yes. He sat in the back, arms crossed, gaze shifting to the exit every few minutes. He thought he could remain invisible, but my spirit was already moving. The pastor opened to Psalm 1. "Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked." He shifted uncomfortably. Each word pierced like an arrow. The scripture was alive, sharper than any blade, cutting through excuses, slicing open the calluses around his heart. He tried to resist. He told himself the words were for someone else. Yet the sermon grew heavier, pressing closer. The pastor's voice rose. "Maybe you're here today and you've been running. Maybe you filled your life with noise and pride, but deep down you miss your father. His breath caught. That was it, the phrase. You miss your father. He did. He missed me. He missed the innocence of childhood prayers, the warmth of singing with his grandmother, the security of knowing he was loved by me. And suddenly the hunger in his soul roared louder than the music, louder than the pride, louder than the lies. When the altar call came, he hesitated. People moved forward, heads bowed, tears streaming. He stayed frozen in his seat. But then the pastor stepped down from the platform, walked straight toward him, and locked eyes. "How are you doing?" the pastor asked, laying a hand on his shoulder. He forced a grin. "I'm fine, work's good." The pastor didn't move. His voice softened but grew more insistent. "How are you really doing?" He swallowed hard, looking at the floor. "I'm good, really." The pastor leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "No, how are you doing?" At that moment, the dam broke. His chest heaved, his shoulders shook, and he wept. Not the quiet tears he wiped away in secret, but deep guttural sobs that racked his whole body. Years of pride, rebellion, guilt, and shame poured out all at once. I was there. I wrapped him in my love, not in wrath, not in condemnation, but in overwhelming embrace. He expected punishment, a lightning bolt, a scolding voice. Instead, he felt me running toward him, arms wide, just like the father in the story of the prodigal son. When he finally lifted his head, the pastor was praying, but he barely heard the words. All he felt was wave after wave of my presence washing over him like warm rain after drought. That night he went home different. He tried to explain it to himself. Maybe it was just emotion. Maybe it was the music. Maybe it was. But deep down he knew. It was me. He pulled an old Bible from the shelf, its pages yellowed, the cover worn. He flipped it open at random, and his eyes fell on Jeremiah 15:19. "If you return to me, I will restore you. You will be my spokesman." His heart pounded. That was not coincidence. That was confirmation. The days that followed were not without temptation. The old friends still called, the old music still played, the old habits still beckoned. But something had shifted. My spirit now burned within him. He felt conviction where before there had been numbness. He felt hunger for my word where before there had been apathy. He began to pray again, not polished prayers, just raw words whispered into the silence. "God, I don't want to go back. Help me." Each prayer was a seed, and I watered every one. He didn't notice at first, but others did. His mother saw it in his eyes, the softness returning the spark she thought was gone forever. His father noticed it in his posture, less arrogance, more humility. Even his friends felt it. Some pulled away uncomfortable with the change. Others leaned in curious. The call that began like a whisper had now become a flame. I had pierced his heart, cut through the barrier, and drawn him close again. And though the journey ahead would still be long, the turning point had come. He was mine, and I was awakening him to life once more. I did not merely call him back. I began to restore him. My love is not half-measured, not a bandage for the moment. My love is a full resurrection. And so in the weeks that followed, I touched every broken place in his life. He woke each morning with a strange new hunger. The Bible he once left to gather dust now lay open on the nightstand, its pages worn with fresh fingerprints. At first he read slowly, stumbling over the words, unsure if they could apply to him after all he had done. But the verses leapt like fire. "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, behold, the new has come." He whispered those words out loud, letting them settle into his chest like medicine. At night, instead of parties and noise, he sat quietly, sometimes with a journal, sometimes with tears, sometimes only with silence. And in that silence I spoke. Not with condemnation, but with reassurance you are forgiven. You are mine. I have called you by name, and I will use you still. Temptations did not vanish overnight. Old patterns lingered. There were nights when loneliness prowled like a wolf, when memories of sin tried to seduce him back. But now he had a weapon, my spirit alive within him. Conviction came swiftly cutting through the fog. He found himself dropping to his knees, crying out, Lord, I can't do this alone. And each time I answered, I strengthened him. I lifted him when he stumbled. I sent people into his life. A mentor at church who had once wandered too, who now carried wisdom earned in fire. Friends who prayed with him, who reminded him that walking with me was not a solo journey. Even strangers spoke words that confirmed his new path. A cashier who said, God bless you with sincerity that made his throat tighten a song on the radio that echoed his prayers. His family, once weighed down with worry, began to breathe again. His mother, seeing him sit at the table with a Bible, felt tears slip down her face. His father, watching him bow his head before a meal, felt pride stir, not the pride of boasting, but the gratitude of a father who knew his prayers had been answered. One Sunday he stood in church, hands lifted, not half-hearted, not forced, but freely. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he sang. For the first time in years, the songs were real again. The presence of my spirit wrapped around him, and he realized this was what he had been chasing all along. Not the applause of men, not the fleeting thrill of sin, but me. Soon I began to stir the gifts I had placed in him long ago. As a child, he had sensed my call to ministry, though he buried it beneath rebellion. But I do not revoke my gifts. They remain waiting for the moment of resurrection. Now in his restored heart, those gifts awaken. At a Bible study, the leader asked if anyone would share a testimony. His pulse quickened. He hesitated, but then he spoke, halting at first, then stronger. He told them about the drift, the darkness, the breaking point, and my call like the wind. The room grew still. Tears flowed, and afterward a young man approached him and said, That's my story too. If God can change you, maybe he can change me. In that moment, he understood his pain had become his pulpit. His scars had become his sermon. I gave him opportunities to serve. At a gym ministry, he greeted strangers, wiped down weights, and shared encouragement. At first, he thought it was small, insignificant. But each smile, each prayer, each scripture spoken over, someone was a seed, and I multiplied those seeds. Soon he was leading small Bible groups, praying for people at work, even stepping onto platforms he once avoided, declaring boldly what I had done for him. The enemy tried to attack. Old shame whispered, You don't deserve this. Remember who you were. But my voice thundered louder. You are forgiven. Your sins are as far from you as the east is from the west. You are a new creation. He clung to that truth, and slowly the shame broke. The chains of guilt snapped. The lies lost their power. This was not only about him. Restoration rippled outward. His younger siblings, watching his transformation, grew curious. They asked questions about faith. His friends who had once mocked began to listen when he spoke. Some even followed him into church, trembling as they too encountered my presence. He began to dream again, not of worldly success, but of eternal impact. He thought of missions, of preaching, of helping the broken. At night he prayed, Use me, Lord, however you want, wherever you want. And I smiled, for this was the prayer I had waited to hear. Restoration is not simply the absence of sin, it is the presence of purpose, and now purpose burned bright within him. He walked lighter, spoke with humility, loved with tenderness. People noticed. You're different, they said. And he was, because I had taken his heart of stone and given him a heart of flesh. The lost heart was now a living heart. The broken vessel now overflowed. The one who chased feasts of pride now feasted on my word, my spirit, my presence. What he thought was ruined, I rebuilt. What he thought was wasted, I redeemed. What he thought was lost forever, I restored. And this was only the beginning. Restoration was never meant to stop at forgiveness. Forgiveness is the doorway. Life in my light is the journey beyond. And so once I had restored him, I led him into a new season, a season where his life no longer belonged to the feast of pride, but to the banquet of my eternal presence. He discovered that joy did not come from applause, but from obedience. He found more satisfaction in serving quietly than he had ever found in being celebrated loudly. At the gym where he worked, he greeted people with warmth. Strangers felt seen. Some asked, "Why are you always smiling?" He would answer simply, "Because I've been forgiven." And their eyes widened with curiosity. Soon conversations deepened. He prayed with coworkers in break rooms. He encouraged the weary who walked through the gym doors carrying burdens heavier than any weight they lifted. He started a Bible study there. Nothing elaborate, just open Bibles, open hearts, honest words. And people came. Some broken, some searching, some skeptical. But they came, and one by one they found me. The ripples reached farther. His family, once anxious for his soul, now rejoiced. His siblings saw a brother who once lived recklessly, now lived faithfully. His parents, once weary from prayers, now watched answers unfold before their eyes. His grandmother, still singing hymns in the kitchen, smiled with tears when she heard him humming along. I even touched his friendships. The ones who had mocked him now respected him. Some drifted away, but others returned, drawn by the authenticity of his transformation. He shared his story not to glorify his rebellion, but to magnify my grace. And through his testimony, hearts softened, chains broke, and others began their own journeys home. He married, built a family, and raised children in the faith he had once abandoned. The home that could have been fractured by his rebellion now rang with laughter, bedtime prayers, and songs of worship. Where there had been despair, there was now legacy. Where there had been ashes, there was now beauty. In ministry, I expanded his influence. He preached with humility, not as a man who thought himself perfect, but as one who knew he had been rescued. His sermons carried weight because his scars spoke louder than his words. When he said, "God restores people," believed him because they could see it. And I smiled, for this was always my plan, not just to save him from darkness, but to shine my light through him into the lives of many. He still faced challenges, storms of doubt, seasons of weariness, but now he knew where to run. He no longer turned to feasts that left him empty. He turned to me, and in my presence he found strength, peace, and joy that endured. The man who once chased pride now walked in humility. The man who once drowned in shame now lived in grace. The man who once wandered in darkness now carried light. And that light was eternal. Now I turn to you, the one listening, the one watching, the one perhaps carrying a story of your own. Maybe you too have drifted. Maybe you too have chased feasts that never satisfied. Maybe pride, sin, or shame has wrapped chains around your heart. Hear me, my call is for you as well. Just as I called him, I am calling you. Like the wind that cuts through barriers, my spirit is pressing even now, whispering, "Come home." You may fear judgment. You may expect wrath. But I tell you, what waits for you is love, an embrace, a robe of righteousness, a ring of belonging, a seat at my table. No matter how far you've wandered, no matter how deep the darkness, my light is greater. Do not wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow is never promised. But this moment, this very breath is holy. My arms are open. My heart is ready. Come back to me. Let me restore you. Let me awaken your heart. And if this story has touched you, share it. Let others know that no one is beyond my reach. Subscribe, listen again, tell a friend, because stories of redemption are not meant to be hidden. They are meant to shine. I saw him fall into darkness, but with one touch I awakened his heart, and today I long to awaken yours.